People voted. From the moment they got off the boat at Castle Garden or Ellis Island, everybody voted. And political participation was high.
The always increasing working class vote worried New York's political barons in both parties. Strikes and boycotts in the summer of 1886 forced politicians to act, and they jailed union leaders.
Labor leaders in July of 1886 say, enough with the major parties. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are in the grasp of big business. They have no interest in the problems of working people. We're going to form an independent Labor Party, and we're going to run somebody for mayor. And they begin to court Henry George.
Henry George did not look the part of political savior. An unassuming 47-year-old author who dressed like a small-town merchant, George was not seeking a life in politics just then. But he was intrigued by the offer.
He's the perfect candidate. He's a worker, so he's got these working class credentials, but he's also an intellectual. He's also a public figure.
Henry George's renown was almost entirely self-generated, born out of his own difficulties with the rapidly changing American economy. A native of Philadelphia, George had gone west to California when he was just 19 to make his fortune. He tried his luck in the gold fields, set type in printing firms, and even sold hand-crank clothes dryers door to door to support his young family. Nothing worked. His low point came the day his second child was born, and his new printing business was failing.
He is absolutely broke, and he doesn't know what to do. He's completely desperate. Now he has a family to provide for. So he steps out onto the street, and he walks up to a man and says, "Can I have $5? And the man gives him the $5 bill, and George writes, "I was desperate enough to have killed him for that money." Henry George sort of imprinted in that moment in a way he's never going to forget. Here he is, this hardworking, smart, ambitious man, and he's out there on the streets begging for his little family.
He begins to wonder what's going on. This is a country with plenty of land. It's a country with plenty of resources. It's a country with millions of people who want to work and who can't. What has gone wrong?
George spent nearly a decade parsing the riddle and emerged with an answer. A 500-page tome describing the new American political economy.
He produces this book that draws everyone's attention to what ought to have been plain as a nose on their faces, the sheer fact of inequality, poverty amid plenty.
What George recognizes is that along with American progress, with the development of the economy, with the development of great fortunes, there's also the development of poverty, that the success of America is not uniformly spread. He said that it's not fairly spread.
It is as though an immense wedge were being forced through society, George wrote. Those who are above the point of separation are elevated, but those who are below are crushed down. Henry George self-published his new book, Progress and Poverty, and moved to New York in 1881 to promote it. It will ultimately be considered a great book, he told his father. This I know. He was right. Progress and Poverty was a surprise bestseller.
One of the things that captures people's imagination is the way he talks about poverty. He breaks with the American tradition, which always said poverty is the result of your own failures. George says it's not your own fault. It is the fault of the way we have organized our economy, the way we've allowed certain things to develop unchecked and uncontrolled. There's no reason for anybody to be poor in America.
Labor parties had run candidates for mayor in New York before. They rarely polled more than several hundred votes. But in the fall of 1886, with little more than a month to Election Day, Henry George agreed to toss his hat in the ring on behalf of working people.
He sees it as a way to popularize his ideas. The 1%, as George calls it, owns New York. So for him, it seems a perfect example of the problems that he talked about in his book.
He accepts the nomination, and over the next 5 weeks or so, they launched the most incredible campaign in New York City history. He will give 5, 6, 7 speeches a night all around the city. This is called the tailboard campaign, because he would get in these wagons, they'd pull the wagon up in front of a railroad station, in front of a factory, flip down the tailboard, and Henry George would stand up and deliver a speech urging people to not vote for the major parties, but to vote for the United Labor Party.
Look over our vast city, and what do we see? George would say. On one side, a very few men richer by far than it is good for men to be. And on the other side, a great mass of men and women struggling and worrying and wearying to get a most pitiful living. Is this by the will of our divine Creator? No, it is by the fault of men. We are going to the polls. George championed opportunity for all, and a city government that would prevent the strong from oppressing the weak and the unscrupulous from robbing the honest. He offered big new ideas, like increased taxes on property owners, public ownership of mass transit, and better working conditions.
Once the grassroots campaign gets going, he sort of played off his own momentum and the enthusiasm of the crowd and began to realize something seems to be happening here. He starts to have a sense that we could actually win this thing.
Most political pros believed his message was too radical to have wide appeal. They figured he would poll 5,000 votes, maybe 10,000. Not enough to beat the favored Democrat or the Republican challenger.
On Election Day, right out of the gate, people are reporting huge turnouts. At the end of the day, George finishes second. He gets 68,000 votes, which is a lot more than just a few hundred, which is what a typical Labor Party candidate could get.
The appeal of Henry George indicates that a growing number of Americans believe that there is something seriously wrong with the emerging American economy. America retains this idea that it is this land of opportunity. And when people like Henry George say, we have to pit workers against employers, the poor against the rich, what he is saying is, it's not the land of opportunity. The opportunity is closed off.